Video games, more than any other medium, are subject to change. There are a myriad of reasons why content gets replaced or simply deleted. The rights holders for video games will do what they want to do, and we are merely here for the ride, so it's best not to get too mad. As they say, we'll always have the memories. I'm Si for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game moments you'll never see again. Number 10. The original ending, Mass Effect 3. When it comes to Mass Effect 3, any debate about the game will always immediately be overshadowed by the outcry that its ending created. After 3 games of build-up and player choice, gamers around the world were aghast at the 3 identical non-endings that Mass Effect 3 served up that negated all of a player's personal investment. In order to try to soothe enraged fans, BioWare released the extended cut, which bolted scenes into and around the existing conclusions to give better clarity to each final choice and the consequences. Reactions to this were mixed, but it was at least better than nothing. It was a band-aid on the wound. Thankfully, it seems that moving forward, at the very least, this plaster is staying on. Despite the mass controversy following the end of the trilogy, Mass Effect stayed popular enough to warrant the Legendary Edition re-release. Naturally, the extended cut comes as standard, as does the Citadel DLC that bulks out the final act. Number 9. Billy and Sid, Final Fights. Over the years, the official gender of Final Fight's Poison has been much the topic of debate and consideration from fans and from Capcom themselves. Once considered to be trans in the East and cis in the West, Poison was officially declared gaming's first transgender woman in 2011. Her first appearance was alongside palette-swapping buddy Roxy in the original arcade Final Fight. Naturally, these characters were considered a source of potential controversy, and as such were replaced by generic male thugs Billy and Sid. This pair made their only appearances in the 1990 SNES and 2001 GBA versions. It was around the turn of the millennia that Poison made her debut playable performance in the Japanese exclusive Final Fight The Revenge, and at this point Capcom and their publishers had to draw some kind of line. Moving forward, Poison became one of the most recognisable figures of the franchise, even crossing into Street Fighter multiple times. She could no longer be ignored. Billy and Sid existed simply for Nintendo to shy away from Capcom's design choices, with the mere existence of trans people being far less of a taboo subject these days, and Poison herself being a poster girl for Final Fight. You can be certain we've seen the last of Billy and Sid. Number 8. The original soundtrack, ONIMUSHA. This is a peculiar entry for a list with this title because you don't see music unless you've got synesthesia or a really good dealer. All the same, it's something that is certain to never return. In 2001, Capcom released ONIMUSHA, an interesting combination of samurais and survival horror that made it a bit of a cult classic. The game's 2018 remaster was reviewed fairly as a pretty straightforward update with not many new additions. One major alteration, however, was the soundtrack. Memorably, the composer for ONIMUSHA was the Japanese Beethoven Mamoru Samagochi, named so because he was deaf. Except he probably wasn't, and he didn't write a note of music in his life. In 2014, after decades of being celebrated for his work amidst his struggles with his disability, Samagochi was outed as a fraud. His work was crafted by that of ghostwriter Takashi Nagaki, who claimed that Samagochi wasn't even deaf. With the legal disputes that followed, it's hard to know who owns the rights to ONIMUSHA's original soundtrack. Regardless of ownership, Capcom likely deliberately avoided it and made something new to move on from their history with the fraudulent Samagochi. As such, if ONIMUSHA ever gets ported forwards again, it'll be the HD remaster, and it will certainly be the replacement soundtrack. Number 7. Peter Parker's original face, Marvel's Spider-Man. Peter Parker has been portrayed by several great actors. Last year it became Marvel's worst kept secret that the cinematic history of Spider-Men would be uniting for No Way Home, and fans were gleeful seeing 3 different Parkers all working together on screen. However, it's not just the films where Spidey has had different faces under the mask. Insomniac Games' lauded cityscape-exploring open-world title went through a transition of its own when the game released its PS5 remaster. Gone were the familiar thick brows of John Bubniak, replaced by the soft features and high cheekbones of Ben Jordan. Fans were thrown through a bit of a loop for a few reasons, one of which being that the game had been a finished product for a couple of years, and yet here Insomniac were making rather major changes. Also, hearing the same voice performance by Yuri Lowenthal coming out of a new face was understandably perplexing. The reaction was mixed, and the decision was met with some amount of backlash. Insomniac Games' official statement was that they changed the face because they weren't happy with how the original matched up to Lowenthal's voice and merely wanted something else. A company doesn't make a big change like this unless they're going to stick to it, so Bubniak's Peter Parker will most certainly be a thing of the past. Number 6. Chris Redfield's temporary face, Resident Evil 7. Okay, maybe companies do make big changes and then walk them back. Resident Evil 7, for all of the compliments that could be paid to its atmosphere and bold choices to change perspective, doesn't get enough praise for its visual design. Using photogrammetry to meticulously scan objects, it gave the Baker estate a very grounded feeling, especially in VR. Capcom, proud of the technology, also used it for the game's cast. In Resi 7's closing moments, the protagonist is saved by a mysterious man who unmasks and offers his hand. Introducing himself as Redfield, most fans had the same reaction. No, you're not. The Resident Evil community was up in arms about the face change to the long-serving Chris Redfield, even going so far as to theorise that it was all a ruse. After all, Chris had been fairly consistent in design for the last decade, and it was a very sudden shake-up. Of course, when the next instalment rolled around, Capcom put their brave decision behind them, and in Resident Evil Village, Chris resembles at least a halfway house between the two. RE7's imposter Chris does appear as an unlockable skin in the series' undercooked multiplayer spin-off RE-verse, but it's a sure thing that this face remains a hilarious memory and never gets a starring role again. Number 5. Red Cross logos. Every game with a medikit. When asked to picture what a health bar in a video game looks like, most people would include the same symbol. The bold red cross, taken from the charity of the same name, is a universally understood sign and has appeared in hundreds of video games. Which, in fact, is why the International Federation of the Red Cross put a statement out in 2006 that video games should no longer use the symbol. Concerned that it would devalue the importance of the logo in real humanitarian protection, it meant that designers had to get creative and even alter classics. One of the earliest and most noticeable games to be tweaked was the Xbox Live Arcade version of Doom 2. The beautiful sight of the life-saving medikit was updated, and the red cross on the front was replaced with a red pill. New iterations in the series have opted for a sneaky inversion with a red square divided by a white cross. It's affected numerous titles, from Halo changing their health packs to feature an H, Skullgirl's character Valentine changing her nurse's outfit to feature pink crosses, and indie developers Introversion Software being sent a stern request for a removal of the symbol from Prison Architect. You'd think that making players rely on such a symbol in their free time would make them value it more in real life, but them's the breaks, legally speaking. Number 4. Darth Vader vs Yoda, Soul Calibur 4. 2008's Soul Calibur 4 got well and truly on the absurd carriage of the guest fighter train when it launched with Star Wars characters. Most noticeably, the PS3 version featured Darth Vader, and the Xbox 360 introduced Yoda. This was such a selling point for Bandai Namco that the guest characters took up prime real estate on the game's covers. Views were mixed on the inclusion of the characters, not to mention how broken they were, but also the exclusivity and how it affected players' incomplete character selection screens. 3 months after release, however, the missing Star Wars battler became available on the online store of the opposite system. Finally, Vader and Yoda could meet one-on-one, something that has never been seen in Star Wars history. However, if you wanted to go back and play Soul Calibur 4 and haven't previously downloaded this DLC, then you've truly missed your chance. Sometime around 2016, the option to purchase the missing character was removed from each store. Explicit reasons are hard to find, but it's easy to assume that Disney, who picked up the Star Wars IP and have a history of being disinterested in the games industry, didn't care to renew another contract. The one showdown between the two giants of Star Wars takes place in an unrelated fighting game, but only if you've already paid for it. Number 3. The base campaign, Destiny 2. Bungie's massively multiplayer online shooter has not had an uncontroversial 8 years since it first launched. With the first Destiny being binned off surprisingly quickly for the second, players were shocked in 2020 when it was announced that the company would be deleting the base content for Destiny 2. To make room for new updates, Bungie took offline all of the game's starting campaign, and then the following year did the same for the Forsaken DLC. It's not just plot points or missions that disappear, but every time Bungie does this, portions of the map are gone forever. Hold on to those hazy memories of visiting IO or the Tribute Hall. In August 2022, Bungie announced that they would no longer sunset their content, but a lack of a statement on previously deleted campaigns is rather telling. Whilst parts of the content of older stories have been returned to, being able to play earlier raids or dungeons seems pretty unlikely. With the current saga of Destiny 2 set to conclude in 2023, Bungie are pushing forwards with a new era for the franchise, which by their metric will be designed in a way that makes it easy to onboard new players who might otherwise feel like they've got too much to catch up on. Considering you've deleted most of it, Bungie, they wouldn't have much of a choice to catch up on it anyway. Number 2. Mike Tyson, Punch-Out and WWE. When Nintendo brought Punch-Out from the arcade to the NES, they had the stroke of genius to include heavyweight boxing champion Mike Tyson. Not only would the name value move cartridges in the West, but making players work their way to the end of the game to fight Tyson was a great way to sell the game rather than to lose out to rentals. Of course, contracts like this don't last forever, and Tyson's time was eventually up. In later releases, he was replaced with the ultimately generic Mr. Dream, and this second edition effectively replaced Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. What makes this weirder is that it happened again for a totally different series. WWE 13's career mode went nostalgia heavy as it ran through the greatest hits of the Attitude Era. One of these was replaying the WrestleMania Stone Cold vs Shawn Michaels match where Tyson had famously appeared as guest enforcer. A contract for Tyson's likeness allowed THQ to add the champ to the game as DLC. However, when 2K did a Stone Cold showcase mode for WWE 2K16, Tyson was nowhere to be seen. Instead, he was replaced by a generic white dude called Special Enforcer, which, when you think about it, creates an interesting fantasy booking web about Mr. Dream after the events of Punch-Out. Maybe Tyson only likes to do something once, or perhaps he has high demands for extending contracts, but his obvious absences from both feel very final. Number 1. First Contact, Elite Dangerous. Elite Dangerous released in 2014 and became a solid spaceflight simulator about exploring the galaxy and making money in whatever way you so wished, from simple mining to chaotic bouts of piracy. The term First Contact is pretty self-explanatory, and you only get one chance to make a first impression. Considering the circumstances, it's not surprising that Elite Dangerous player Robert Settig's reaction to seeing aliens in the game was stunned and terrified. Horror games can be scary, but you typically know when you're playing one. Whilst the Elite series featured aliens in the past, the latest iteration was a spacefaring adventure with zero intergalactic life for the first 2 years it was online. Then, one normal day, Settig was pulled out of hyperspace travel to be the first person to witness extraterrestrial life looming over him. Imagine the shock, wonder and horror. There had been hints and clues this was coming for some time within the game, and Settig just so happened, it seems, to have been travelling at the right place and right time. Thanks to the developers' tight lips, theories still fly today about why the ship saved Settig from pirates and then chose to fly away. Since that day in 2017, encounters with the Thargoid species have increased and even gotten violent. But players will forever marvel over the video of one man's first contact. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below, and any other examples you can think of video game stuff which has been replaced and it's almost certain it's never coming back. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Si for WhatCulture, and have a good week.